Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Today, May 24th, 2024, is the 62nd anniversary of Scott Carpenter's repeat of John Glenn's three orbits around the Earth. Glenn did it on February 20th, 1962, and a little over 2 months later, Scott Carpenter repeated that. Kind of a controversial mission. Some said it was a great mission. Others said it cost him flying anymore for some of the things that he was accused of doing that actually was a problem with some instruments on board the Mercury Aurora 7. So we're going to talk about Scott Carpenter today, and I pulled out some obscure maybe facts about him that you didn't know. But we love talking about our Mercury astronauts because the Mercury astronauts in Gemini and Apollo helped found this American Space Museum some 25 years ago when the nonprofit U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation was created. And the museum, American Space Museum, is the outreach for that. That's our nonprofit, and we built the Mercury Monument out by the Indian River, just about 3 blocks from where our studio is inside of our museum in downtown Titusville. We'll see some pictures of that, but that's why the Mercury astronauts in Gemini are really dear to our hearts because they were there to help build this museum. Not physically, the concept of it. We've been in 6 or 7 locations over its 20 some years, but we've been on Pine Street now for about 8 years, and we're so proud that you find time to contribute some of your money to us as well as a lot of your time at our events and staying curious with us today. So, special shout out to my friends at the International Space Development Council in Los Angeles, California. That includes Doug Forrest, artist out there who watches every day. Hey, Doug, send us a picture of your situation out there showing your artwork off, and we'll show it on Tuesday when we come back because, after all, tomorrow or this week is Memorial Day weekend, and we will be taking Monday off. The museum will be closed, and we'll be back staying curious with you and open up our doors on Tuesday, May 28th. So I hope everyone has a safe Memorial Day weekend. And wanted to mention a couple other our friends out there at the International Space Development Council. That would be our friends from the National Space Society. Bert Dick is out there. Hi, Bert. And he's going to be on the show talking all about that in June. And we've got Gabriel Rothblatt, the executive director of the local chapter here in Florida, and Jennifer Muntz is out there, and they're glad-handed and passing out their magazine. Here's an older issue of it, Ad Astra. So the Ad Astra team's out there, Bert, Jennifer, and Gabriel. And again, hello to Doug Forrest out there. Hope you sell a lot of your artwork. We've shown it off to a lot of astronauts. Marty certainly has. Your Endeavor pencil sketch is unparalleled out there. So, well, once again, remember your veterans. I'll be involved with several events here in Titusville as I'm the president of the City of Titusville Flag and Memorial Committee. So it's a great group of people with mostly the social events centered around the different military organizations we have here. So. But I wanted to give a shout out to my grandpa. This is my grandfather's Wikipedia entry, Mel Marquette. I'll make it a little smaller there so you can see his full name here in Wikipedia. He'd be 140 years old, but he was in the first 2 Indy 500s in 1911 and 12. Also worked for the Wright brothers and the 13th person to have an aviation license in the United States. And then he was a Purdue grad and went into this exotic chemical called rubber. And my grandpa, Gramps as we called him, was involved in the rubber business, particularly with Cooper Tire in my hometown of Findlay, Ohio. And Lord, he died in 1961 when I was just a little kid. But the legacy strong in the Marquette family. He was the first one to wreck at an Indy 500, so that makes sense in our legacy there. So little shout out to Gramps there, Mel Marquette thought about. And if you have it in your heart to join our museum, you can do it from afar. And the if you give us up to $250 for a Sentinel membership, we'll send you 2 complimentary tickets to Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. That's worth $180 right there. And we have different levels that you can support us as seen there at the on our website. So we want to mention that. Well, Mercury Atlas 7 was uh, the program. Atlas, of course, the rocket shown there, the big silver Atlas rocket. I think it's so cool that 62 years later, humans will ride an Atlas rocket to space. That being Butch Williams and Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmer. Once they get launched, hopefully next Saturday on that Boeing Starliner, but it's going to be flying an Atlas V rocket. So the legacy continues for the proud Atlas program. And we have our Cape Canaveral Gallery here at the American Space Museum has we celebrate Atlas there. We've got a lot of the pad stuff that was at the Atlas pad 36 and 19 and 14 and other ones. And I'm going to show you a picture from here that pertains to that room here in a minute. But so we're proud of that because this Atlas rocket launched over 350 satellites in the 60s and interplanetary probes to Mars and Venus. And it was just an amazing workhorse. And here it's going to put humans back in space. But we're here to talk about when it put Scott Carpenter in space, one of the Mercury 6 astronauts. I meant to throw up a picture of them up there, but you know them. And they're my heroes growing up a baby boomer. They named their spacecraft. He had named his Aurora 7. All right. Though he grew up in Boulder, Colorado, at his grandparents' house at the corner of Aurora and 7th Street, he claimed that was not really motivation for him to name his spacecraft that. But we'll talk about him here in a second. A little bit more about his life. So Scott Carpenter was the 4th American and I think the 7th human being to orbit the Earth. And here we are 62 years later. This is the total. 617 humans have orbited the Earth. Women orbited the Earth are 77. There's about 45 Karmanauts. That's Marty's term for it. Hi, Marty Winkle. He's our co-producer here. Kicking back in the director's chair as we've got Logan Cope here to help us on the board. Well, Logan, you're doing a great job. He's an intern from the Eastern Florida State University just down the road. Let me have a little sip of some courage here. Thank you, the Motor City Detroit boy up there, Dave Stange. All right, there you see the tally. And put this together also, Marty, for astronaut John Harrington that we're going to interview after taking John to dinner tonight. And we'll air that recording on another segment of Stay Curious. But the most record number for humans orbiting Earth was 18. That was last May as Axiom 2, commanded by Peggy Whitson and 3 others inside, added to the people who are on the International Space Station and the Chinese Tiangong Space Station. So the numbers, in my opinion, are quite low for 60 years of human space travel. Well, there's our Mercury monument. Those bricks all have people's names on them that worked on the Mercury program. And in the foreground, right there, you can see one of the handprints in bronze of our 7 Mercury astronaut heroes. Of course, 6 flew and Deke Slayton was grounded. Deke Slayton was supposed to have this Mercury flight that Scott Carpenter took, but he had a little bit of a fibrillation in his heart, and he was scratched from grounded for atrial fibrillation, something that they'd give him some metoprolol or something like I take to clear up. 60 years later, but it grounded him until he was he put himself on the Soyuz Apollo mission on there. So he did get to fly in space eventually. But the 7 is inside of what is known as the astrological sign for Mercury. That is the beautiful Space View Park area, the Max Brewer Bridge going over to the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge, and just a great scene over there where we've got, I want to tell you about Scott Carpenter. Here's a close-up of him while I give you a little background and put my glasses on for it. He, of course, was born in Boulder, Colorado. He died in October 2013 at age 88, so he lived a long life, and he was known as Buddy or Bud as a kid. All right, his parents briefly moved to New York City because his father was a Columbia University professor. They got divorced. They moved back to Colorado in Boulder, and he was deeply affected by the attack on Pearl Harbor, like most American young men and women, and he enlisted in the Navy. And then he took the usual Navy route of flying Navy planes. He wasn't a jet fighter, okay, but he went to a Lockheed P-2 training unit. He only flew propeller planes, and I know that. You'll find out here in a few minutes he was the only one of the Mercury 7 that didn't fly a jet plane, and they kind of looked down on him a little bit on that. So he was actually chosen out of 508 graduates of test pilot schools that the Department of Defense recommended. From that, they whittled it down to 110, and then they knocked it down to 32, and then finally to 12, and they said 6 would be the best, but they couldn't knock off that last one because 7 were so fully qualified. So he became the sensation of America, the Mercury 7 astronauts. They were sort of thought as mythical people in a way for what they were going to do. So after Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom's suborbital flights, and then John Glenn's 3 orbits in February 20th, 1962, Carpenter was the capsule communicator for that flight, and he's the one that said, "Godspeed, John Glenn," my iconic words of the space age, and those were uttered by this man, Scott Carpenter. So 40 million people watched his flight, but let's talk about that here in a minute. There is his launch, 40 million people on TV back in 1962. Wow, you're lucky to have 100 million television sets maybe in America. He performed 5 onboard experiments. He was the first American to eat solid food in space. John Glenn had eaten applesauce. Not sure what he ate. I think it was bacon bites. He also identified the mysterious fireflies observed by Glenn during Friendship 7's flight. Glenn observed particles floating around his window. And, Carpenter had an idea what they were, and he banged the side of the spacecraft, rapping on it near the window, and he could make the fireflies come out. Therefore, it was frost on the side of the spacecraft, and he renamed them frost flies. So Carpenter's performance in space was subject to criticism and controversy. I'll talk about that next here just a minute, but I wanted to show you. Here's the launch on May 24th, 1962. But here's an image. There we go. Where are we going? Taken just 6 weeks before on April 7th, 1962. And I have this picture here. We show this in our Cape Canaveral gallery. This is an Atlas blowing up on April 7th, 62. John Glenn flew from this pad on February 20th. Then March, April, 6 weeks later, an Atlas blew up on the pad, and Scott Carpenter watched it, probably with all the other Mercury astronauts. And then he got on one, then he climbed on one 6 weeks later and flew safely on there. So I'm just emphasizing the unknowns, not just of space, but the reliability of this vehicle. And one of my favorite photographs That is the late Mr. Lee Solid, who passed away several months ago. God rest in peace, Lee. We miss you a lot, and what a wonderful family he has. But I saw him back there, and I asked him, "Would you hold this?" I go, "Do you have anything to do with this?" "Oh yeah, yeah. I worked on the engines on that for Rocketdyne, Mr. Solid back there in the '60s, and then he was responsible for all the engines on the Saturn V rocket for Rockwell, all 32 engines." Uh, he said, "We figured out what happened, and it never happened again." And I said, "But I'm looking at the date. Scott Carpenter uh, flew like 6 weeks later on the same kind of rocket." And he says, "Yep, that's how things went back then. You know, they're pretty brave." A sustainer pump exploded at 0.88 seconds after liftoff. First indication was at 0.87 seconds, and it ruptured the tank at 1.2 seconds. The pump explosion was because of the rubbing of rotating and non-rotating parts, caused either by contamination or unknown loads. So, you know, even 62 years ago, we knew within a hundredth and a thousandth of a second what had happened to things on there. So, Logan's holding up a comment sign. Go ahead, Logan. I'm going to get on my smart tablet here and pull him up also. Take it away, buddy.
Dave Stange, Dave Stange says that he read somewhere that Scott actually said Godspeed, referring to the turbine pump on the rocket engine. Have you or Marty ever heard that story?
Oh, he says instead of he's saying Godspeed, he meant Godspeed. No, I think it's clearly he says Godspeed in there. And good afternoon to Mark Usiak, and hello there, Carlton Bailey. He's watching in the queue line at KSCVC. Okay, waiting for his autograph from the wonderful John Harrington. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dave Stange says, to our service men and women watching today's show who put their lives every day on the line for us. Well said there, Dave. And Tom UCX says, hope everyone has a nice holiday weekend. Be safe. And I can probably speak for Dave Jokum there, Tommy, by saying if Ferrari wins at Monaco, it will be a great weekend. So the great Formula One race there, and that the Principality of Monte Carlo. So, all right. Well, we're on cue here with everybody on there. But just love you, Lee Solid. Just God, what a great mentor he has been to me here. And we miss him a lot. But he really did say that, you know, and I'm going like, Lee, that looks, wow. You think the Mercury astronauts? Oh, yeah, they were there. They saw this blow up and then got it on again. So there's Scott Carpenter. Pretty simple photograph, pretty simple spacesuit, just kind of an adaptation of a high reconnaissance aircraft spacesuit of the time. And there he is talking to C.C. Bibby, C-E-C-E Bibby, B-I-B-B-E. She was an artist that painted the logos in the United States and anything they wanted on the capsule. And she was, like all artists, she had other mediums that she worked in. There she is talking to Scott. And she came up with these little sketches that are in our Mercury gallery. These were between the seats. You're sitting in a Mercury capsule. Between your legs is a periscope that you would look out, all right? Then they put a window above you. The window wasn't there until the astronauts complained about they wanted a window. But they mostly looked at the Earth through that periscope. And when you look through the periscope in training, they would see these. It's you and me, John Baby, against the world. That was for Friendship 7. And then she put in there, but Scott, sweetie, Yellow Bird again. And I think Yellow Bird was a song that he loved. And I meant to look up who's the Yellow Bird song that he sang over and over. There's an iconic photograph of Scott in front of the meatball and the Mercury Control Center, which we have got that Mercury Control Center banner in our Mercury gallery. And there he is with Gunter Wendt, the pad leader, and being suited up and checked out somewhere around the rocket, you would assume. And And here he is inside the very cramped spacecraft. Okay. The gloves on one hand, his left hand, you can see it pretty good. The pointing finger where he's holding the paper has got a light bulb in it. And he actually flips on a switch that I can see the switch on top of his hand for the 9-volt battery to see the light. The other thing I find of interest in this picture is look on his chest, and you see a breastplate there that is a concave mirror. All right, so that it goes out so that you can see the instrumentation in the mirror there from the photographic film being made through a movie camera. So if he had a switch in the wrong place and was incapacitated and couldn't talk about it or killed, they would know that on there. But very cramped. They didn't experience weightlessness, but they didn't unstrap and get out. All right. The idea was to just sit there, and and I don't think any of them dared get out and move around at all and unstrap themselves. It was too confining, and they're probably worried they were going to hit something around the spacecraft control systems there. So, all right, so he did get in trouble because he landed 250 miles off target. Some consider it the most successful mission to date. Everything had gone perfect except for some over expenditure of hydrogen peroxide fuel. Well, launch director Chris Kraft blamed Scott Carpenter as too much sightseeing and jockeying in space there to try to maneuver, and that Kraft was very infuriated by this. And then he came 250 miles off target, and Kraft blamed the astronaut for that. So much so that in his 2001 memoir, Chris Kraft wrote, and I quote, "He was completely ignoring our request to check his instruments. I swore on oath that Scott Carpenter would never fly again in space." Wow, that's pretty strong words. And then Kraft went so far as to name the chapter of his memoirs dealing with Carpenter's flight as, quote, "The man malfunctioned," unquote. Well, it was later found out that something called a pitch horizon scanner, PHS, had malfunctioned and was the cause of the over expenditure of fuel. So it was an electronic computer device that was very primitive, that was malfunctioning, and he had to take over manual controls very late in the retrofire sequence, which caused him to go 250 miles off. The malfunction of a pitch horizon scanner circuit dictated the pilot manually control the spacecraft attitude during reentry, and he was caught off guard about it, and I don't know if you call that aloof, but so I remember watching this as a kid on TV, and we had worried that Carpenter had not survived. In fact, Walter Cronkite but he had plenty of training. There he is in a training situation there in the life raft. And during reentry, there was a great deal of public concern over whether he had survived. News channels, CBS, ABC, and NBC were painting a grim picture. But NASA knew he was okay the moment he landed. They had a search and rescue homing beacon, Sarah it's called, in recovery vehicles and aircraft carrier all knew where he was and were on their way. But it took him almost 2 hours to get there. So what do you do? Knowing it'll take time to go get you. He's in this capsule. He's probably hot now inside of that capsule, rocking around in the ocean. Well, he got out of it. So how did he get out? No, he did not get through the hatch. He went through the neck of the spacecraft, something the less agile John Glenn had been unable to do. And he inflated his life raft, climbed into it, and awaited rescue. And around him, the sea was a green dye that was released so that you could see him real easy. Aircraft saw him about 35 minutes after he splashed down. And then 3 hours later, he was picked up by HSS-2C King helicopter. So all was well, and he become a national hero, of course. And then you didn't have social media, of course, 60 years ago. So it wasn't until maybe Newsweek or Time magazine came out that a week or two later that would talk about the the use of the fuel and so forth. Of course, Chris Kraft never said anything in public about it at the time, but Gene Cernan said this in his book. Scott was the only multi-engine pilot among the elite cadre of veteran jet pilots, and it was whispered that he didn't volunteer for the space program. His dynamic and attractive wife did. Okay. Scott was just glad to be around and was physically fit to an amazing degree. But he screwed up on his own Mercury flight by joyriding, not paying enough attention to the job, missing his retrofire cue, and splashing down several hundred miles from the target area. It became pretty obvious that Scott would never fly in space again. And that's from Gene Cernan, one of the group of astronauts after Carpenter, and of course the last man to walk on the moon. So, well, he here's a picture of his handprints out there at Spaceview Park. How they're out there. There is his my hands in those handprints there. Got a comment there, Marty?
Yeah, Mark, I think he was the only Mercury astronaut to not be invited to the White House after his flight.
Oh, he was?
He was the only one not invited.
Well, I know Grissom wasn't, too. Because
really?
Grissom's wife was very upset she wasn't going to get to meet Jackie. And that was in one of those Tom Hanks biopics of the missions. But you can be right about that, too. Not questioning that at all, Marty. Yes, that was always something that they would get to go to the White House and meet President Kennedy, who had pledged that we were going to the moon, and Jackie, his wife, and so forth. But yeah,
Yeah, you're right about Grissom. I forgot about that.
yeah, Grissom was kind of slighted too on that, and they shouldn't have played favorites that way. I don't think. Let's see. Here's put my hands in there. Pretty normal hands. A lot of the astronauts are pretty small hands. There's he, and not sure what the circumstance is, but doing the twist by Joey D. They're looking at a couple albums there. Yellowbird, that's what it was. There's the Yellowbird song that he loved, and that the CC Bibby alluded to in that writing there. So, and there's Jacques Cousteau and our astronaut Scott Carpenter. Well, Cousteau gave a lecture at Massachusetts Institute of Technology that Carpenter attended, and he was very impressed with the underwater research project, and that suggested Carpenter said you might want to join the Navy Sea Lab project, which he did. And so while Carpenter probably knew he was never going to fly again, he never got considered for Gemini or anything. He was probably read the Riot Act. Yet he didn't resign as an astronaut. He went into Sea Lab 2, spent 28 days living on the ocean floor off the coast of California. All right. He actually got the right index finger was wounded by toxic spines of a scorpionfish. And in 1965, when Gordon Cooper orbited the Earth, Scott Carpenter held a conversation with him while he was on Sea Lab on the ocean's floor, the first conversation between a craft in outer space and one on the ocean floor, for whatever that's worth. There's his book. I've read it, For Spacious Skies. I actually read it so long ago I forget about what he said. His daughter is the Chris Stover that helped write him then there. But he retired and had a good life. He actually wanted to mention that he became part of NASA again as what he ended up doing that was very interesting. Even though he got in trouble with NASA, he was with them for several more years, dealing with the science section of NASA, and I'm trying to find the exact job that he had there. Can't pull that up here, but he wasn't kicked to the curb. All right. He was NASA's executive assistant to the director of Manned Spacecraft Center, then joined the Navy's Deep Submerged Skylab program and was its director for Sealab 3, and retired from NASA in 67 and the Navy in 69. So he was out when the Apollo era was going on, and he became a consultant to sports and diving manufacturers, very athletic, fit gentleman. Was one of the forerunners of the fitness craze, not craze, but the way we should keep our bodies. He was the consultant to film industry on space projects and oceanography. He was on television commercials. Marty and I were talking about it. He thinks that he was on Dick Van Dyke's show. A lot of the astronauts did appear on some of the popular TV programs. And you might have seen him on a television commercial for Oldsmobile, Standard Oil of California, Nintendo, and Atari. Now, he wrote this book in 2003, okay, late in life. But in 1991, he wrote a techno-thriller fiction book, The Steel Albatross. And in 1994, he wrote another techno-thriller called Deep Flight. I don't have a clue what either one of those is about, but I'll look him up, I think. Marty even thinks he was on a game show or two, as they would appear maybe on Match Game or Concentration or something like that. So here he is at an event. He lived to be 88. John Glenn lived to be 95. They certainly were buddies till the end. He was never, like I said, never shunned like Chris Kraft would indicate so vehemently, that he was so mad at him for and grounding him, which, Marty, I question the resources of not just scolding a guy and maybe demoting them or docking their pay or something, because you've invested a lot in training this guy as a Mercury astronaut, and after his first flight, you don't want him anymore because you think he goofed off a little bit or whatever, which I don't really think he did. And that's not a statement on Chris Kraft either, but
at
wow.
the time, they thought he screwed up.
Yeah, I mean, there was no margin for error, and it was his own life, but still, it was the national resources he preserved. Anyway, Scott Carpenter was married 4 times, divorced 3 times, total of 8 children by 3 of the wives. Sounds like an astronaut to me. Not really. Either they stay with the same couple, stays together for 50 years, or they get divorced frequently. But his second wife was Maria Roach, the daughter of film producer Hal Roach. And if you've seen The Little Rascals and some of those other early shows, Hal Roach was involved with a lot of Hollywood stuff. He actually had a child in his 60s with his third wife, and but he died a happy man at age 88. Had a stroke actually, and was hospitalized. And of course, his funeral was quite a state funeral for Scott Carpenter there. But you see pictures of him as an aquanaut and so forth. He was ripped. He had a great build, and he was very active to the end. There's our friend, Mr. Hugh Harris, the late Hugh Harris, introducing Scott Carpenter at an event at Kennedy Space Center. And there's Scott at one of the events around here. I believe this was a dedication of the Apollo monument here at Spaceview Park. And he's talking to Gene Cernan. I don't know who the lady is in between there, but there is Scott Carpenter and Gino there, who I read his quote from his book that, you screwed up, buddy, but, maybe they should have been a little more forgiving. I don't know. His remains were cremated, and his ashes are at the family's ranch near Steamboat Springs. And when asked in 2012 what his legacy would be, Scott Carpenter replied, "I was an astronaut and I was an aquanaut." So there's one of our great American heroes, Scott Carpenter, becoming so this date in space history 62 years ago on May 24th, 1962. So hope you enjoyed looking at all that and looking back in history. And once again, I'm maybe making too much of the fact that Scott Carpenter wrote an Atlas rocket, and we're going to have an Atlas rocket take humans to space eventually. So anyway, we hope everybody's enjoyed that. I want to thank again. Going to have some Vidalia onions on a big hamburger over the weekend for sure. Thank you, Gary Gerald, for these delicious onions. Been sharing them here at the museum, and I'm looking around any other thing I've got to go. Let's show off Steve Jokum's patch there for his Lake County Spaceport. Thank you for your support, Steve. And we want you to like us on YouTube channel. If you to comment, you have to become a subscriber to YouTube, but that's just giving your a email address. I've never ever get any email or anything from YouTube. I think it's a safe thing to join. But Hazel Banks, hello to you anyway, because I know that you're not going to join it and comment, and that's fine. Yeah, you can make comments on the bottom, I think, not on the thread on the right. But yes, like us on YouTube and share it with everybody. Our numbers are going up, and we're very appreciative of that because we are monetizing Facebook for our nonprofit, and then of course monetizing YouTube. All right, and then of course on Facebook we have almost 12,000 followers on Facebook. We don't want to become the biggest. We want to become one of the best that puts content out there like nobody else on astronaut birthdays, shuttle flights, shuttles of the month, and of course the legacy, the Apollo era. We will always be celebrating on our Facebook page, and we'll always be blocking those hoaxers out there as quickly as we can. So hope you enjoyed the beautiful peninsula of Florida. Our intern Logan Cope chose that from our reservoir of pictures to use. Very appropriate, I think. Love that shot. Got little clouds over here. We're right here. We're right there, that part of Florida right there. And hope everyone has a wonderful Memorial Day. Be safe, because we want you to come back to our museum and stay curious with our program here. Logan, anything to button up on before we say goodbye?
Man, a few words.
All right. He was off school this week and did a good job all week, and we appreciate the help. And Marty, of course, being a great teacher of him there. So hope everybody can spend some time out under the stars, and the full moon's up, the flower moon. Flowers are everywhere across our fruited plain. Get up and get you a little moonshine on your face, and you'll love it. Look around at the bright stars and download an app so that you can see the International Space Station and even the Chinese Space Station and the Hubble telescope go overhead. So chill out, enjoy a hamburger or two over our wonderful American holiday, Memorial Day, and I can't wait to see you again on Stay Curious to bridge the space between us. Take care.